Venezuela is located on northern coast of South America, consisting of a continental landmass, many islands and islets in Caribbean Sea. Comprises an area of 916,445 kilometers square. Population 29 million in 2022. The capital and largest urban agglomeration is Caracas City. The continental territory is bordered on the north by Caribbean Sea and Atlantic Ocean. On the west by Colombia. Brazil on the south. Trinidad and Tobago to the northeast. On the east by Guyana. Venezuela is a presidential republic consisting of 23 states, capital district, and federal dependencies covering Venezuela's offshore islands. Venezuela is among the most urbanized countries in Latin America. The vast majority of Venezuelans live in the cities of the north and capital. The territory of Venezuela was colonized by Spain in 1522 amid resistance from indigenous peoples. In 1811, it became one of the first Spanish-American territories to declare independence from the Spanish and to form part of the First Federal Republic of Colombia, Gran Colombia. It separated as a full sovereign country in 1830. During 19th century, Venezuela suffered political turmoil and autocracy, remaining dominated by regional military dictators until mid-20th century. From 1958, the country had a series of democratic governments, as an exception where most of the region was ruled by military dictatorships and the period was characterized by economic prosperity. Economic shocks in the 1980s and 1990s led to major political crises and widespread social unrest, including the deadly Caracazo riots of 1989, 2 attempted coups in 1992 and impeachment of president for embezzlement of public funds charges in 1993. The collapse in confidence in the existing parties saw the 1998 Venezuelan presidential election, the catalyst for Bolivarian revolution, which began with 1999 Constituent Assembly where a new constitution of Venezuela was imposed. The government's populist social welfare policies were bolstered by soaring oil prices, temporarily increasing social spending and reducing economic inequality and poverty in the early years of the regime. However, poverty increases rapidly in the 2010s. The 2013 Venezuelan presidential election was widely disputed, leading to widespread protest, which triggered another nationwide crisis that continues to this day. Venezuela experienced democratic backsliding, shifting into an authoritarian state. Venezuela is a developing country and has the world's largest oil reserves and has been one of the world's leading exporters of oil. Previously, the country was an underdeveloped exporter of agricultural commodities such as coffee and cocoa, but oil quickly came to dominate exports and government revenues. Venezuelan refugee crisis, in which more than 7.7 million people fled the country by June 2024. 2024 presidential election were not recognized by Carter Center and Organization of American States due to lack of granular results and disputed by opposition, leading to protests across the country. Venezuela is located in the north of South America. Geologically, its mainland rests on South American plate. It has total area of 916,445 kilometers square and land area of 882,050 kilometers square, making Venezuela 33rd largest country in the world. The territory it controls lies between latitudes 0 degrees and 16 degrees north and longitudes 59 degrees and 74 degrees west. Shaped roughly like a triangle, the country has 2,800 kilometers coastline in the north, which includes numerous islands in the Caribbean, and northeast borders the northern Atlantic Ocean. Most observers describe Venezuela in terms of 4 fairly well-defined topographical regions. Maracaibo lowlands in the northwest. Northern mountains extending in a broad east-west arc from Colombian border along northern Caribbean coast. Wide plains in central Venezuela. Guiana highlands in the southeast. The northern mountains are the extreme northeastern extensions of South America's Andes mountain range. Pico Bolivar, the nation's highest point at 4,979 meters, lies in this region. To the south, the dissected Guiana highlands contain the northern fringes of Amazon Basin and Angel Falls, the world's highest waterfall, as well as tepus, large table-like mountains. The country's center is characterized by llanos, which are extensive plains that stretch from Colombian border in the far west to Orinoco River delta in the east. The Orinoco, with its rich alluvial soils, binds the largest and most important river system of the country, originates in one of the largest watersheds in Latin America. Caroni and Apure are other major rivers. Venezuela borders Colombia to the west, Guyana to the east and Brazil to the south. Caribbean islands such as Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, Curaçao, Aruba and Leeward Antilles lie near Venezuelan coast. Venezuela has territorial disputes with Guyana, formerly United Kingdom, largely concerning Essequibo area, and with Colombia concerning Gulf of Venezuela. In 1895, after years of diplomatic attempts to solve border dispute, the dispute over Essequibo River border flared up. Venezuela is entirely located in the tropics over equator to around 12 degrees north. Its climate varies from humid low-elevation plains where average annual temperatures range as high as 35 degrees Celsius to glacier and highlands, paramos, with average yearly temperature of 8 degrees Celsius. Annual rainfall varies from 430 millimeters in the semi-arid portions of the northwest to over 1,000 millimeters in Orinoco Delta of the Far East and Amazonian jungle in the south. The precipitation level is lower from August through April. These periods referred to as hot humid and cold dry seasons. Another characteristic of the climate is this variation throughout the country by the existence of a mountain range called Cordillera de la Costa, which crosses the country from east to west. The majority of the population lives in these mountains. The country falls into 4 horizontal temperature zones based on elevation, having tropical, dry, temperate with dry winters and polar, alpine tundra, climates, amongst others. In the tropical zone below 800 meters, temperatures are hot, with yearly averages ranging between 26 and 28 degrees Celsius. The temperate zone ranges between 800 and 2,000 meters with averages from 12 to 25 degrees Celsius. Many Venezuela's cities, including the capital, lie in this region. Colder conditions with temperatures from 9 to 11 degrees Celsius are in the cool zone between 2,000 and 3,000 meters, especially in Venezuelan Andes where pastureland and permanent snowfield with yearly averages below 8 degrees Celsius cover land above 3,000 meters in the paramos. The highest temperature recorded was 42 degrees Celsius in Mexiques and the lowest temperature recorded was -11 degrees Celsius, reported from an uninhabited high altitude at Páramo de Piedras Blancas, Mérida State. Venezuela lies within the neotropical realm. Large portions of the country originally covered by moist broadleaf forests. One of 17 megadiverse countries, Venezuela's habitats range from Andes Mountains in the west to Amazon Basin rainforest in the south, via extensive Llanos plains and Caribbean coast in the center and Orinoco River Delta in the east. They include xeric scrublands in the extreme northwest and coastal mangrove forests in the northeast. Its cloud forests and lowland rainforests are particularly rich. Animals are diverse and include manatees, three-toed sloth, two-toed sloth, Amazon river dolphins and Orinoco crocodiles, which have been reported to reach up to 6.6 meters in length. Venezuela hosts a total of 1,417 bird species, 48 of which are endemic. Important birds include ibises, ospreys, kingfishers, and yellow-orange Venezuelan troupial, the national bird. Notable mammals include giant anteater, jaguar, and capybara, the world's largest rodent. More than half of Venezuelan avian and mammalian species are found in Amazonian forests south of Orinoco. For the fungi, an account was provided by RWG Dennis which has been digitized and the records made available online as part of Cybertruffle Robigalia database. That database includes nearly 3,900 species of fungi recorded from Venezuela but is far from complete, and the true total number of fungal species already known from Venezuela is likely higher, given the generally accepted estimate that only about 7% of all fungi worldwide have so far been discovered. Among plants of Venezuela, over 25,000 species of orchids are found in the country's cloud forest and lowland rainforest ecosystems. These include Flor de Mayo orchid, Cattleya mossii, the national flower. Venezuela's national tree is araguaini. The tops of the tepus are also home to several carnivorous plants including the marsh pitcher plant, Helianthera, and the insectivorous bromeliad, Brachynia reducta. Venezuela is among the top 20 countries in terms of endemism. Among its animals, 23% of reptilian and 50% of amphibian species, including the Trinidad poison frog, are endemic. Although available information is still small, first effort estimate number of fungal species endemic to Venezuela was 1,334 species of fungi have been tentatively identified as possibly endemic. 38% of over 21,000 plant species from Venezuela are unique to the country. Venezuela is one of the 10 most biodiverse countries on the planet, yet it is one of the leaders of deforestation due to economic and political factors. Each year, 287,600 hectares of forest are permanently destroyed and other areas are degraded by mining, oil extraction, and logging. Between 1990 and 2005, Venezuela officially lost 8.3% of its forest cover, which is about 4.3 million hectares. In response, federal protections for critical habitat were implemented. 20% to 33% of forested land is protected. The country's biosphere reserve is part of the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. 5 wetlands registered under Ramsar Convention. In 2003, 70% of the nation's land was under conservation management in over 200 protected areas, including 43 national parks. Venezuela's 43 national parks include Canaima National Park, Morocoy National Park, and Mocaima National Park. In the far south is a reserve for the country's Yanomami tribes. Covering 82,880 square kilometers, the area is off-limits to farmers, miners, and all non-Yanomami settlers. Venezuela was one of the few countries that did not enter an INDC at COP21. Many terrestrial ecosystems considered endangered, especially the dry forest in the northern regions of the country and coral reefs in the Caribbean coast. The country is made up of 3 river basins: Caribbean Sea, Atlantic Ocean, and Lake Valencia, which forms an endorheic basin. On the Atlantic side, it drains most of Venezuela's river waters. The largest basin in this area is the extensive Orinoco Basin, whose surface area, close to 1 million kilometers square, is greater than that of the whole of Venezuela, although it has a presence of 65% in the country. The size of this basin, similar to Danube, makes it the 3rd largest in South America and gives rise to a flow of 33,000 cubic meters per second, making Orinoco the 3rd largest in the world and one of the most valuable from the point of view of renewable natural resources. The Rio or Brazo Cassiquiare is unique in the world, as it is a natural derivation of Orinoco, whereby 500 kilometers in length connects to Negro River, which in turn is a tributary of Amazon. The Orinoco receives directly or indirectly rivers such as Ventuari, Coro, Caroni, Meta, Arauca, Apure. Other Venezuelan rivers that empty into Atlantic are the waters of San Juan and Cuyuni basins. Finally, there is Amazon River, which receives Guinea, Negro, and others. Other basins are Gulf of Paria and Essequibo River. The second most important watershed is the Caribbean Sea. The rivers of this region are short, scarce, and irregular flow, with some exceptions such as Catatumbo, which originates in Colombia and drains into Maracaibo Lake Basin. Among the rivers that reach Maracaibo Lake Basin are Chama, Escalante, Catatumbo, and the contributions of smaller basins of Tocuyo, Yaracuy, Nevery, and Manzanares rivers. A minimum drains to Lake Valencia Basin. Of the total extension of the rivers, a total of 5,400 kilometers are navigable. Other rivers worth mentioning are Apure, Arauca, Cora, Meta, Barima, Portuguesa, Ventuari, and Zulia. The country's main lakes are Lake Maracaibo, the largest in South America, open to the sea through the natural channel but with fresh water, and Lake Valencia with its endorheic system. Other noteworthy bodies of water are Guri Reservoir, Altagracia Lagoon, Camatagua Reservoir, and Mucubaji Lagoon in Andes. The valleys are undoubtedly the most important type of landscape in Venezuelan territory. Not because of their spatial extension, but because they are the environment where most of the country's population and economic activities concentrated. On the other hand, there are valleys throughout almost all the national space, except in the great sedimentary basins of Llanos and the depression of Maracaibo Lake, except in Amazonian peneplains. By their modeling, the valleys of Venezuelan territory belong to 2 types: valleys of fluvial and valleys of glacial. Much more frequent, the former largely dominate the latter, which are restricted to the highest parts of Andes. Moreover, most glacial valleys are relics of past geologic epoch which culminated 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. The deep and narrow Andean valleys are different from the wide depressions of Aragua and Carabobo in Cordillera de la Costa or from the valleys nestled in Mesas de Monegas. Likewise, due to warm climate, Guayana valleys are distinguished from the temperate or cold Andean valleys by their humid environment. Both are different from the semi-arid depressions of Lara and Falcon. The Andean valleys, essentially agricultural, precociously populated but nowadays in loss of speed, do not confront the same problems of space occupation as the strongly urbanized and industrialized valleys of the central section of Cordillera de la Costa. On the other hand, the unpopulated and practically untouched Guiana valleys are another category. This area is called the Lost World, Mundo Perdido. Andean valleys are undoubtedly the most impressive of Venezuelan territory because of the energy of encasing reliefs, whose summits dominate the valley bottoms by 3,000 to 3,500 meters of relative altitude. They are also the most picturesque in terms of their style of habitat, forms of land use, handicraft production, and all the traditions linked to these activities. Venezuela has a great diversity of landscapes and climates, including arid and dry areas. The main desert in the country is in Falcon near city of Coro. It is a protected park, the Médanos de Coro National Park. The park is the largest of its kind in Venezuela, covering 91 square kilometers. The landscape is dotted with cacti and other xerophytic plants that can survive in humidity-free conditions near the desert. Desert wildlife includes mostly lizards, iguanas, and other reptiles. Although less frequent, the desert is home to foxes, giant anteaters, and rabbits. There are also native bird populations such as sparrowhawk, tropical mockingbird, scaly dove, and crested quail. Other desert areas in the country include part of Guacharo Desert in Guacharo Municipality in the north of Zulia State and facing Gulf of Venezuela, Médanos de Capanaparo in Santos Luzado National Park in Apure State, Médanos de la Isla de Zapara in Zulia State, the so-called Hundition de Ye in Andres Eloy Blanco Municipality of Lara State, and Uramaco Formation also in Falcon State. Tourism developed considerably in recent decades, particularly because of its favorable geographical position, variety of landscapes, richness of plant and wildlife, culture, and tropical climate. Margarita Island is one of the top tourist destinations. It is an island with a modern infrastructure, bordered by beaches suitable for extreme sports, and features castles, fortresses, and churches of great cultural value. Los Roques Archipelago is made up of a set of islands and keys that constitute one of the main tourist attractions in the country. With exotic crystalline beaches, Morrocoy is a national park, formed by small keys very close to the mainland, which have grown rapidly as one of the greatest tourist attractions in the Venezuelan Caribbean. Canema National Park extends over 30,000 kilometers to the border with Guyana and Brazil. Due to its size, it is considered the sixth largest national park in the world. Its steep cliffs and waterfalls, including Angel Falls, which is the highest waterfall in the world, at 1,002 meters, form spectacular landscapes. The state of Mérida is one of the main tourist centers of Venezuela. It has an extensive network of hotels not only in its capital city, but also throughout the state. Starting from the same city of Mérida is the longest and highest cable car in the world, which reaches the Pico Espejo of 4,765 meters. Venezuela is connected to the world primarily via air. Venezuela's airports include Simon Bolívar International Airport in Maiquetía, near Caracas, and La Cainita International Airport near Maracaibo, and sea, with major seaports at La Guaira, Maracaibo, and Puerto Cabello. In the south and east, the Amazon rainforest region has limited cross-border transport. In the west, there is a mountainous border of over 2,213 kilometers shared with Colombia. The Orinoco River is navigable by ocean-going vessels up to 400 kilometers inland and connects the major industrial city of Sayud, Guayana to the Atlantic Ocean. Venezuela has a limited national railway system, which has no active rail connections to other countries. Several major cities have metro systems. Caracas Metro has been operating since 1983. The Maracaibo Metro and Valencia Metro were opened more recently. Venezuela has a road network of nearly 100,000 kilometers, placing the country around 45th in the world. Around a third of roads are paved. The people of Venezuela come from a variety of ancestries. It is estimated that the majority of the population is of Pardo, or mixed, ethnic ancestry. In the 2011 census, which Venezuelans were asked to identify themselves according to their customs and ancestry, the term Pardo was excluded from the answers. The majority claimed to be Moreno or white 51.6% and 43.6%, respectively. Slightly more than half of the population claimed to be Moreno, a term used throughout Ibero-America that in this case means dark-skinned or brown-skinned, as opposed to having a lighter skin. Ethnic minorities in Venezuela consist of groups that descend mainly from African or indigenous peoples. 2.8% identified themselves as Black and 0.7% as Afrodescendant. 2.6% claimed to belong to indigenous peoples and 1.2% answered other races. Among indigenous people, 58% were Waya, 7% Guacharo, 5% Querina, 4% Pemen, 3% Proa, 3% Jivi, 3% Anu, 3% Kumanagoto, 2% Yukpa, 2% Chima and 1% Yanomami. The remaining 9% consisted of other indigenous nations. According to an autosomal DNA study conducted in 2008 by University of Brasilia, the composition of Venezuela's population is 60.6% European, 23% indigenous, and 16.3% African. During the colonial period and until after the Second World War, many of the European immigrants to Venezuela came from Canary Islands and Spain with a relevant amount of Galicians and Asturians. These immigrants from Spain had a significant cultural impact on the cuisine and customs of Venezuela. These influences on Venezuela led to the nation being called the eighth island of the Canaries. With the start of oil exploitation in the early 20th century, companies from the United States began establishing operations in Venezuela, bringing with them U.S. citizens. Later, during and after the war, new waves of immigrants from other parts of Europe, Middle East, and China began. Many were encouraged by government-established immigration programs and lenient immigration policies. During the 20th century, Venezuela, along with the rest of Latin America, received millions of immigrants from Europe. This was especially true post-World War II, as a consequence of war-ridden Europe. During the 1970s, while experiencing an oil export boom, Venezuela received millions of immigrants from Ecuador, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic. Due to the belief that this immigration influx depressed wages, some Venezuelans opposed European immigration. The Venezuelan government, however, were actively recruiting immigrants from Eastern Europe to fill a need for engineers. Millions of Colombians, as well as Middle Eastern and Haitian populations, continue immigrating to Venezuela into the early 21st century. According to the World Refugee Survey 2008, published by the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, Venezuela hosted a population of refugee and asylum seekers from Colombia numbering 252,200 in 2007, and 10,600 new asylum seekers entered Venezuela in 2007. Between 500,000 and 1 million illegal immigrants are estimated to be living in the country. The total indigenous population of the country is estimated at 500,000 people, 2.8% of the total, distributed among 40 indigenous peoples. There are 3 uncontacted tribes living in Venezuela. The Constitution recognizes the multi-ethnic, pluricultural, and multilingual character of the country and includes a chapter devoted to indigenous peoples' rights, which opened up spaces for their political inclusion at national and local level in 1999. Most indigenous peoples are concentrated in 8 states along Venezuela's borders with Brazil, Guyana, and Colombia, and the majority groups are the Waya in the west, the Guacharo in the east, the Yanomami installed in the south, and the Pemen, which are mostly in the southeast of Venezuela. Although most residents are monolingual Spanish speakers, many languages are spoken in Venezuela. In addition to Spanish, the Constitution recognizes more than 30 indigenous languages, including Waya, Guacharo, Pemen, and many others for the official use of the indigenous peoples, mostly with few speakers, less than 1% of the total population. Waya is the most spoken indigenous language, with 170,000 speakers. According to a 2011 poll, 88% of the population is Christian, primarily Roman Catholic, 71%, and the remaining 17% Protestant, primarily evangelicals. 8% of Venezuelans are irreligious. Almost 3% of the population follow another religion. 1% of these people practice Santeria. There are small but influential Muslim, Druze, Buddhist, and Jewish communities. Muslim community more than 100,000 concentrated among persons of Lebanese and Syrian descent living in Nueva Esparta state, Punto Fijo, and Caracas area.